Hi, this is the review of the orderIT system activity for October 12, 2020. We had 20 trades occurred. 17 were identified as short sells, and 3 were identified as buys. We're going to go through and review each one to see the results. First one is BX. Identified as a short sell, Blackstone Group. It dropped 3/4%. It was at 55.34 identified and ended at 54.94, so that did come down at the end of the day. It was identified as below, so that was actual positive trade. Look at the analysis just to see indications. As you can see, OBV showing it somewhat down for the most part. A bit of an upward trend in the middle of the day. MACD showing the same thing. DI, a bit of back and forth, but mostly down on DI. Bollinger Band again showing that it was a direct down, so that again was a positive trade for that day. Next one is BAM. It's identified as a short sell. Brookfield Asset Management down almost 4.5%, so that definitely was a downtrend. That opened or identified at 36.24 and ended the day at 36.01, so that technically is still a positive trade because of the fact that it closed below its trade point indication. We'll take a look at the review of the analysis. OBV again showing it somewhat down. MACD actually was showing a general progression upwards, interestingly, and it was basically bouncing back and forth, but actually was showing somewhat a strong positive movement, even though it was down below the baseline. It still was showing a positive, so that actually is interesting. Bollinger Bands showing pretty much negative all the way through. So Bollinger Band was showing a very strong negative downtrend. Excuse me, DI was showing a negative downtrend. Bollinger Band, again, trade activity was showing that it was moving pretty much downwards, so that again is the results of that trade. BB, identified as a short sell. BlackBerry Limited, down 3 3/4 practically, well, over 3 3/4%. It was identified 508, ended the day at 4.99, so that technically was a positive trade indication because it closed below its indication point. Let's take a look at the analysis. OBV, morning down and afternoon, jumping back and forth, but actually coming up. MACD actually was showing it moving positive early morning, coming down late morning, and going back and forth. So MACD is somewhat not a positive indicator. DI, though, across the board, it's down. So that's where you see it again. Bollinger Bands is just indicating that it's down across the board. Next trade. This is Citigroup. It actually was down, but this one was actually marked as a buy opportunity. 48.38. 48.28, so it actually ended the day down from the point of indication. It was identified at 12.25, so around here, and yeah, the price range is showing it was moving sideways, but it did not show any point where it came above it, but it moved sideways, so no major negative trend downwards. I'll mark this as a so-so or a questionable trade. No end result showing that it was absolutely positive, but then again it wasn't negative. The morning is not showing any activity pre-market, so we have to see on that one. But OBV, no real true indication there. It was moving up here a bit, moving up a bit, moving up a bit. Technically it is somewhat moving sideways. MACD, it actually was showing positive in the morning, negative somewhat in the afternoon, and then late afternoon it was showing positive again, so that somewhat is understandable. DI, morning positive, afternoon, the morning was positive, afternoon it was moving down, and the day came up again, and Bollinger Band somewhat shows the same thing. It showed it was coming back up at the end of the day, but nothing more than what it was, so technically that wasn't a buy trade, or a positive trade. But again, it wasn't a absolutely negative trade either. Next stock is CRK, Comstock Resources. This was identified as a short sell and down, 4.25% down, roughly. And it was tricked at 465, closed at 465, so that's not showing an absolute negative downward trend, even though it tripped at 1230, which is around here, and it actually had a downtrend. So technically, while it closed at the trigger price, it actually did dip down below that during the daytime, so that's still a positive trade. Would have had to been monitored and would have had identify the exit point before the end of the day. Still a positive trade because it was indicating downward activity for the most part. OBV showing that same result. As you can see, mid-afternoon it was coming back, but right after that, late afternoon, dropped. OBV showing that. MACD showing that. Even though late afternoon it was actually coming back via MACD. Bollinger Band showing the same thing. DI showing the same thing, and Bollinger Band showing the same thing. So it did bounce back at the end of the day a bit, but it did drop down below the indication mark. So technically that was a positive trade. Next trade is ICLN, iShare Global Clean. It dropped just over 1%, 1.14% down. It was tripped at 2187. It ended the day at 2160. So by the end of the day, that was still a positive trade. As you can see, early morning it showed a little bit of a recovery, but not drastic. So let's have a look at the analysis. Afternoon is when it came down. Morning time it was moving sideways early morning, or let's say morning time from when it tripped. MACD, it actually was showing a somewhat reversal. So MACD not absolutely, somewhat bouncing back and forth, but it did trip when it was moving down heavily in the early afternoon. DI across the board though was showing negative, so DI showing negative, Bollinger Band actually showing the end result is that it moved down. So again, another positive trade for that. Next trade is GM, identified as a short sell. It dropped 3%. It came in at 39.10. It closed at 39.32, so it actually closed above. Was there any point after the trip? As you can see, it tripped roughly around this area here. So at 39.10, and look here, late afternoon, it was showing that it was down 38, 39. And at the end of the day, it came up, so you can see there was a bit of reversal, but there was still a point that it did dip below the indication points. That's still a positive trade indication. Still a positive trade indication. We'll take a look at the analysis graphs. Moving sideways morning and then early afternoon, it dropped, and you can see that recovery that looked like it was starting to happen. MACD actually was showing it was a bit coming back up early afternoon, but late, middle afternoon, that's where it dropped and came back again. So MACD showing somewhat of a backward forth. DI though strong negative movement. It is showing also though that recovery at the end of the day, and Bollinger Band, same type of thing. It's showing the recovery at the end of the day, and a bit in the middle of the afternoon too, but the end result, it was still a positive trade because it did dip below the actual indication point. Next trade is CLNE, which is identified as a buy trade, and Clean Energy Fuels, it was up 17.5%, which is very interesting because, well, actually the indicators are not showing what they were showing yesterday, but that stock did trade very positive, 17.5%, and as you can see, it was tripped at 313. Ended the day at 332, so that's another positive trade. Take a look at the analysis. Yes, OBV showing somewhat regular progression upwards, especially the afternoon. Morning time it was moving sideways. MACD not showing any heavy movement, even though it was moving early afternoon, but late afternoon and that, it was moving somewhat, moving sideways for the most part, at least from MACD's perspective. DI though, practically positive right across the board. Bollinger Band, which is interesting because it's the chart is not really showing it accurately, but you see it looks like it's almost moving sideways. But the end result is it was still positive, so positive trade. Next trade, DUK, Duke Energy Corporation, a short sell, went down 2.17%. It was tripped at 94.97, ended the day at 94.25. Another positive trade. Check the analysis. OBV showing downtrend. MACD is actually showing a bit of a recovery in the afternoon. It did drop late morning or early afternoon. It was dropping and then reverted, but even though OBV volume-wise was showing negative, MACD is not showing negative. DI showing somewhat a heavy negative movement, so DI is showing it somewhat very positive. And again, the ADX is showing very heavily negative too, so that's also a good indication. The old Bollinger Band showing actually what occurred. It was moving downwards at the end of the day. It did move up a little bit, but in general, it was down for the most part for the whole day. So again, another positive trade. Next trade, BBY. Best Buy, down just under 0.5%. It was identified at 112.70 and actually ended the day at 114. And my guess is most likely it didn't come down below that 12.55. So it tripped around this point and then went up. So that's technically not a trade at all. Take a look at the analysis to see if the analysis is showing anything differently. It was somewhat moving sideways in the morning, and actually afternoon it was starting to come back up. So it tripped early afternoon, but reverted back. So MACD is showing that it was, for the most part, moving positive for most of the day. DI bouncing back and forth. It was down. Actually, no, it's still down a good portion of the day. DI is showing, but you know, yeah. Bollinger Band is down. It just happened to be that it tripped right around here, and then after that point, it started to come back up. So it started to recover right after the tripping point. So that was not a trade. Next trade is CCL Carnival Corporation and PLC, down 7, almost 8%. It was tripped at 15.38. It closed at 14.93, so that actually is another positive trade. And you can see early morning though it did make a recovery. So we'll take a look at the analysis. OBV definitely showing that late afternoon it started to drop. It did trip around here, but at that point it looked like it was almost making a recovery, but late afternoon it just shot down. MACD though is showing it moving downwards, a little recovery in that. We're making a recovery on MACD. DI though showing very heavily a negative movement, so DI was showing somewhat positive, and the Bollinger Band itself just moving downwards. So the end result is this stock was moving down. So the end result is that was another positive trade. Next trade, IRM, identified as a short sell. Iron Mountain Incorporated, down 3.33%. It was tripped at 25.80 and closed at 25.58, so that absolutely would have been a positive trade by the end of the day. As you can see, it made a recovery in the morning time here. We'll check the analysis. OBV showing somewhat a regular downward trending activity. MACD is questionable. It was actually showing a little bit early afternoon, a little bit mid-afternoon, but late afternoon it was actually showing recovery. DI though showing right across the board, practically negative all day long. End of day it was coming back and forth a little bit, but still that. Bollinger Band though down right across the board. So positive trade regardless. MACD. Next trade, DHT identified as a short sell. DHT Holdings down 5.18%. It was tripped at 5.12 and closed the day at 5.13. It was identified at 1.15, which is right around this area, but 5.09 and then recovered a little bit. It did drop below the indication point, so it still is a positive trade, but would have had to be monitored to catch it at the point of where it did drop below. These type of things, I guess you'd have to take a look to see, how is it moving, and if it looks like it's moving sideways, then most likely the opportunity to take a profit when it does drip would be advisable, since it's moving sideways and it going up or down is not clearly identified. Let's take a look at the analysis. OBV showing it moving sideways up until early afternoon, dropping and then moving sideways again. MACD showing it somewhat only negative early afternoon, mid-afternoon, but for the most part not really any clear indication MACD wise. DI though, DI is showing somewhat a very good negative trend, and ADX itself, ADX is the gray line, which is the average, is basically showing the strength of the movement, and it's showing it was moving fairly heavily in the negative direction. So that's a good indication. It was moving negative, and the Bollinger Band again was showing it moving down and then stabilized in the afternoon. Though still a positive trade because it did drop below the indication point. Next trade. Next trade is HPP, Hudson Pacific Properties, to just over 2.5% it dropped. 24.41, 24.01 is the closing, so that was a positive trade. And what we'll do is look at the analysis. This is very interesting. OBV is showing a very positive movement. It still tripped because it was positive, but it looked like it was moving upwards OBV wise. MACD bouncing back and forth. When it tripped, it was down, but you can see it was moving back and forth. It's somewhat into the day moving negative. This is an interesting thing, is that DI was actually showing it. This does not look like the right graph. 13. And this is not the right graph. That's the graph I went to. I was wondering why it looks so strange. This is the graph. There we go. That's better. Okay. Yes, OBV sideways, or center lining during the morning, early afternoon, dropped mid-afternoon, and center line again. MACD showing not really a clear indication MACD-wise. It did drop during the trigger time to moving negative. DI here, though, this is actually showing very strongly moving negative, and again, ADX is very strong too, so that's moving negative. Bollinger Band is showing positive downward trend here. It did look like it was covering a little bit at the end of the day, even though indicators, DI was showing it was moving negative, but the Bollinger Band shows it was still making a recovery. Still a positive trade. Next trade, CELH, Celsius Holding Incorporated. This was actually marked as a buy, up 29%, so obviously a good trade. It came in at 30.22 and closed at 31.96, so definitely positive trade as it ended the day above the indication point. And this is actually the graph for that one. And OBV showing very positive, obviously. MACD showing somewhat positive, for the most part, even though bouncing back and forth in the afternoon. DI again showing very mostly positive movement. Bollinger Band can't see here because the graph is just not showing correctly. Anyways, another positive movement and positive trade. Next trade is LMT, Lockheed Martin. Not down that much, only 0.38%. This is identified as a short sell, and as you can see 365.76 is when it tripped, and it came back up to 367. So we have to see it tripped at 305, which is right around this area, and then it started moving up. So that is not a positive trade. Let's take a look at the analysis to see if it. See, OBD showing negative, MACD showing negative in mid-afternoon. It did have a little bit of a recovery late afternoon, which is obviously the end result. You can see that through the trading graph. DI is actually showing very negative movement, so the stock was moving down. It does show also it's making a recovery at the end of the day, and as you can see, it was moving down all day long. So I marked this as a no trade, but I'm going to put that as a questionable because the Bollinger Band clearly shows this stock was moving down. It was making a bit of recovery at the end of the day, but it was moving down. It just happened to be that it was tripped. It was tripped at the end of the day, which, because the reversal showed the stock that would not have been made a profit by the end of the day. Checking the next stock, MGIC Investment Corporation, down 3.184%. It was 1104, 1101. It was down, not by much, but it was still down by the end of the day. Take a look at the analysis graphs. 1505. That's not the right graph. This graph. So this stock is showing it moving downwards, and OBV moving down at the end of the day, recovered a little bit at the end of the day. MACD somewhat showing the same type of thing, and even though MACD is not 100% showing. DI, as you can see, showing very much a negative, down currently in the day. Bollinger Band showing the same thing. So technically that's another positive trade. Next trade, CGC, Canopy Growth. Again, indication as another short sell, down 1.81%. 2366, 2381. So, is there any movement? So this one here indicated right around this time, which is 2366 roughly, 2359 here. Technically this is a short, so this is a positive trade because there was below trade price movement around here. It just would have been something you would have had to monitor. I still consider this a positive trade because it still did move down below the trade. point that it was indicated at. Let's check the analysis. 520, OBV, basically back and forth. It was down below the baseline, but it was bouncing back and forth, so no true indication there. This is a point where it's moving downwards that it tripped. MACD showing it moving downwards again at that point, even though it was actually somewhat moving positive during the morning period. DI, as you can see, DI though was showing very much that it was moving negative. Again, a bit of a recovery at the end of the day, which is one reason why it did close below. Bollinger Band though was showing very much it moving downwards. Just happened to be at the end of the day it recovered, but there was still a period of time during the late afternoon that it did drop below the indication or trigger point, so I consider that a positive for the trade. Next trade, ACWI. iShare MSCI ACWI ETF down just over 1%, 84.62, 84.86, so that's a question mark. It did trip right around this area. Did it drop below 84.62 at any point? It did drop. Would have been a very tight drop or tight check, but still it's positive in my perspective. But we'll validate by evaluation of the analysis graphs. OBV showing it moving downwards. MACD. Indication-wise, it indicated here early afternoon, mid-afternoon that it was moving downwards, but did recover at the end of the day. DI though, again showing very strongly negative movement, which is somewhat an indication. Bollinger Band was somewhat moving downwards all day, so I still consider this a positive trade, even though an indication point and the trades that occurred afterwards were very tight, so we would have had to monitor this one very closely. And the next trade, MIK, Michael's Companies, again another short sell, down 3.32%. It tripped at 741, end of the day at 743. This is right at the end of the day. So as you can see, there's really nothing there you can check. We'll pick this one as most likely a questionable because it just happened so late in the day. OBV showing it somewhat moving downwards at the end of the day, moving sideways. MACD is actually showing it moving positive in the early afternoon. End of the day though, it was moving down. DI bouncing back and forth. It was moving down though at the end of the day. Bollinger Band though is a good indication that it was moving downward trend. I'm gonna mark this 16, 17. I'm gonna mark this as a questionable just because it happened so late in the day that it was very hard to make a complete conclusion from. So that's the activity that occurred. And we had 20 trades. I identified 16 of those trades were positive trade activity, basically saying that you could make money off of them. And one that was absolutely no trade, and 3 that were questionable. Meaning the aspect is I'm not really sure, it somewhat was, not positive by the end of the day, but the trade was somewhat moving in a way that indicated that it was moving in the direction that would have indicated a positive result by some point in time, just not by the end of the day. So that is an aspect of pardon me for a second. That is 80%, trade activity for that day as being positive. So that was a pretty good day too. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.